speaker, Stephanie Taylor, who is the program lead for the Google Summer of Code program, which is such an amazing and wonderful program in this space. I know how much we support it and adore it and how much you guys all appreciate it. And I know that we have some students here in the audience, so that, or past participants, I should say, in the audience, so both online and in person. So thank you guys very, very much. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce Stephanie Taylor this morning, who's gonna be speaking about the Google Summer of Code and 20 years of OSS mentorship. Take it away.
Thank you. Testing. Thank you all for coming out here this morning. I know getting up Saturday morning is trying, especially when it's warm outside, but thanks for making it here. Today, I'm really going to talk kind of about the overall findings and some of the lessons learned that we have had over the last 20 years of Google Summer of Code. And hopefully this will help you if you're building your own mentorship programs or if you want to be a mentor yourselves. There's lots of tips and tricks in here. So let me get started by introducing myself. I am Stephanie Taylor. I have been at Google in the Google Open Source Programs Office for about 13 and a half years now. And I have been really lucky because I've been able to focus the majority of my time on contributor programs. And the main two contributor programs that we have for open source, getting more open source folks into our communities, are Google Summer of Code and Google Code-In. Anybody here, was anybody here involved in Google Code-In as a mentor, org admin, or student? Yep. A few of you, yes. All right, great. Thank you. So Google Code-In was a contest that we ran for 10 years that was designed to bring pre-university students that were 13 to 17 years old into open source development. So really giving them an introduction to open source. And that taught us a whole lot of lessons, and we'll talk about that later. But today I'm going to mostly focus on Google Summer of Code, which we started back in 2005. When I joined the team, I was helping with Summer of Code, but then I took over the program leading it in 2015. So I've been doing this, I guess this is my 9th program, I think. So it's been a great journey. It's been such an amazing experience, especially to be able to come to events like this and to also just hear so much amazing feedback from our mentors and from our GSOC contributors. That's what we call them now, because not everybody's a student. So when I say GSOC contributor, for the first 17, 18 years, they were all students, but the last couple of years, we have opened the program to people that are beginners in open source, so they just have to be 18 years old. They don't have to be students, so that is a change. But I'm not going to go into the details of how the Google Summer of Code program is run. Happy to talk to you about that after the chat today. I'm just going to kind of move along, because I could do a whole hour and a half on just what GSOC is and all the ins and outs of that, but I'm not going to do that today. Now, both of these programs are mentorship programs, particularly Google Summer of Code. Basically, most people spend about 12 weeks under the guidance of a mentor. Some people, it's up to 22 weeks. This is a change we've made in the program, so anywhere from technically 8 weeks to 22 weeks under the direct guidance of a mentor. All of our programs are remote. They're all online, so the mentor might be in Indonesia and the student might be in Colombia. So it's incredibly important that we've had these amazing mentors. Over 21,000 mentors from 138 countries have mentored almost 22,000. It's like 21,900 and something. So almost 22,000 contributors from 123 countries. So that's pretty amazing. This program wouldn't work without all of those mentors. Those mentors are devoting their time, their energy, they're telling their stories. They're really spending quality time with their mentees. So many of them have been doing it for 15, 20 years, which is amazing. So a big round of applause to all of our mentors. We just did a GSOC meetup here in Denver a couple of days ago, and it was really cool because we asked people to bring t-shirts from the oldest GSOC t-shirts they had, and we actually had people bring 2005, so the first year of the program, 2006, and 2009. So that's pretty amazing. So it goes to show that we really do have a lot of people who, now those are mostly mentors, well actually some of them were students first too, but these are people who have stayed involved in their open source communities for decades, which is amazing. And that's really the ultimate goal, right? We want to mentor people in all of the different open source mentorship programs out there. You want to bring them to your communities, and you want them to stay around. So that is one of the key things we're going to talk about today. One other point is that, so we've been doing GSOC since 2005. Over 1,000 different open source organizations have taken part in this program and mentored students. Someone asked me the other day, well, how do you know if the program is helpful for organizations? And I said, well, if it wasn't helpful for the organizations, they wouldn't come back year after year, because it really is a lot of work. We try to do a lot of the administrative part on our side, on the Google side, to take some of that off of you, like we do the payments, et cetera. But there is still so much organization involved by the org admins for any organization that is participating as a mentoring org in GSOC. So if it wasn't worth it to your community, I don't think you'd be coming back and doing this year after year, because it does take a lot of time and effort and energy from all of your community members, from coming up with the ideas for the projects that you want people to work on, to answering all the different questions on your chat channels, your email list, et cetera, and then of course actually mentoring the contributors, because in most cases the mentees are being mentored by 2 or 3 different mentors, just because oftentimes not every mentor knows every single aspect of a project. So you want to have somebody working on this part, and you want somebody to be mentoring this other part. And then also it's just nice to have backups, because sometimes life happens and the main mentor needs to go away for a few weeks, and so you always want to have someone there to come in and step in to keep mentoring the student, or GSOC contributor. I keep saying student too. So I mentioned that there are a lot of different open source mentorship programs. Google Summer of Code, as far as I know, was one of the first. I think it's definitely the one that's been around the longest, or lasted the longest, for 20 years now. So yes, this is our 20th anniversary. I guess I should have, hence the logo. This is our 20th anniversary, so we're really excited about that. It's a huge milestone, and so we've been doing a few different meetups around the world, and hopefully, we've already met some of you. Hopefully we'll meet some more of you that are online at different events in the next few months. So most of you in this room are probably familiar or somewhat familiar with Outreachy, another amazing program that, you know, we have all these different programs. We also have the Linux Foundation mentorship programs. And then there are also programs that are led by many different open source communities, and there are even open source mentorship programs led by universities and by governments. So there really kind of is something for everyone. One thing to keep in mind is that the programs often are they're all mentorship programs, but they might focus on different groups of people, or they're trying to attract different groups, or maybe they're doing a little different technologies. For example, Outreachy is a great example. Outreachy started in 2006 under a different name, and it's had different evolutions over the years, but currently it really is internships for people that are subject to systemic bias and impacted by underrepresentation in the technical industry where they're living. So it's a very specific group that they're trying to help and bring into your communities. Now the cool thing with Outreachy is also that with Google Summer Code, we have projects that are only coding projects. So it's strictly coding. Outreachy has coding projects, but they also have documentation, research, design, et cetera. And I think they also have event planning projects. So they're really trying to reach a broader section of the overall open source community, because there's so many different skills that are needed in a healthy open source community. So, these are some of the topics that we're going to kind of go through today, and I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, so why is mentorship so important in open source communities? One of the main things is that mentorship or open source can be really intimidating, especially, and it doesn't matter whether you're 15 years old or you're 50 years old. It's just really hard and intimidating to get started in a community where you don't know anybody and you're not sure if you're going to be, I don't know if welcomed is the right word, but maybe what if your opinion doesn't matter? Why should your opinion matter? You know, there's some of that imposter syndrome going on. So you need to make it really easy for people to come into your communities. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why mentorship in these open source communities seems to be so important. Obviously, we have all these different mentorship programs. If it wasn't important, we wouldn't have all these different mentorship programs. We realize, yes, this is a great way to get people involved in our communities and to keep them involved for years to come, really. Because new contributors mean new ideas. They mean new energy. They bring this energy and these perspectives that you can't get elsewhere. And you need that to have a thriving community. If you have 10 people in your community and they've all been doing this for 10 years, that's wonderful. You're all great friends, that's great. But the project will get stale. You need new ideas, new energy, new diversity coming into your program. And so one of the things that's also important is, again, let's say you have 10 people in your organization or your community and you've been doing that, you've all been doing this for 10, 15 years. Great. That also means that you're all now 10 to 15 years older and at different points in your lives. So maybe you're not going to have as much time to commit to the project. Maybe now you're taking care of loved ones, you're going off and getting married, you're moving, all kinds of things can happen in your life that you need to step away. And whether that's stepping away indefinitely or for a year or two, somebody else in the community needs to know kind of what you're working on, because maybe you were the only person that knew anything about this particular feature. Then a bug happens. Nobody else understands why you did some of the things you did. And so they're trying to fix the bug. They can't reach you because you're, hiking Kilimanjaro or whatever, which I do recommend. But, you need to have that knowledge share. And this goes across any kind of job. For my job, for example, I've always been worried about this because I'm thinking, well, what if I'm not going to say hit by a bus, we're going to say win the lottery, that you do have to play to win, but, win the lottery, then what happens to Google Summer of Code? So there's always, you want to have that backup plan, and that means you need to have a backup person. So knowledge share is super important in open source communities. So this is something that we discovered really early on, particularly with Google Codin, and anyone here that participated in Google Codin can attest to this. You need to give the people coming to your community all the help they can get, and that means you need to provide a low barrier to entry. You need to make it easy for them to understand what it is that you do. You'd be surprised, and I'm going to use Google Summer of Code as an example. We asked the organizations, we have over 200 this year participating, and we asked them, give us a 7 to 10 word description of what your project does. If I randomly went to our site and looked at 10 of those, I bet you 3 of them I wouldn't understand what they're saying. So anybody that's coming in, particularly somebody who is new to the tech field, or they just aren't that familiar with open source, they may not understand it. So you need to think about when you're writing your website in the About page, show it to your niece or your nephew who's 15 or 16 years old and say, does this make sense? Do these words together, do you have some sort of idea what we're talking about? That's a good test. Because often the times the people writing this are the people who are so deep in the project, they don't realize that they're kind of, I don't want to say talking over, but they're kind of writing the words that no one else is going to understand. So you want to make it easy for people to understand, because maybe your community is actually doing some amazing stuff, but if people can't understand what you're doing, they're just going to move on. So you want to make it easy for them to be able to just understand what you do. Also, have a link to your code base. Let them be able to see, oh, hey, you're using Rust, you're using Python. Great, those are languages I know. Versus if they come in and they can't even find the code base or link to the code base, they don't know, is this something I could contribute to? And then have some basic FAQs. Just don't have to be 20 pages of FAQs, just some basic FAQs that you see come up a lot in your chat channels, et cetera, your social media channels when people ask questions. Just kind of start an ongoing FAQ and keep adding to it. It's certainly something that I do for my program. And make it easy to find your social channels. Because if you're trying to get people to come to your community and they can't even figure out how to contact you, that's a problem. You know, there's so many different channels. There's Discord, there's Slack, there's people use Matrix, people still use IRC. I do have to say, I mean, we used IRC when I first started GSOC years ago, and people now, if you say IRC, I mean, even 10 years ago when I would mention it, people looked at me, they had no idea what I was talking about, particularly high school and college students. So I'm assuming that's even more the case now. So just think about what your social channels are and try to meet people where they're at. And maybe that means having a couple, which, yes, I know it can be daunting. I understand when you get tons of questions coming in different formats. But you can also make sure you put on there a link to your FAQ or, hey, here's some beginner documentation. The beginner documentation is so important because we realize with Google Coding, again, these are 13 to 17-year-old students that are coming in asking questions. The organizations realized pretty much immediately their documentation was lacking because when you have 30 students, it was also a time-based contest. So when you have 30 students come in and start asking you questions and you're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, they're all asking me the same question. Clearly our documentation's isn't accurate or it's not easy to find. That's the other thing. Sometimes you have great documentation, but it's in some weird part of your website or it's just in your code somewhere, and it's just not easy for people to find. So have a page on your homepage saying, want to get started, or new to our community, check this out, beginner documentation, anything like that. Something where they can click on it, and then it opens up to a whole bunch of other links that they can then click into. That's the ideal situation. Now, for me, this is something that I've always wondered about and thought, oh, a few orgs do this, but most don't. And your community needs a lot of things. You always need developers, that's great. But a lot of communities have great developers, but they need someone who can do event planning. Maybe they have a team event coming up and they're trying to get their community together and they have all these people that can code. That's wonderful, but nobody knows how to organize an event. And that's a definite skill set. So you need to have somewhere on your site, what are the skills you're looking for? Maybe you'll need somebody to do design work, whether that's for the site, or maybe you need to do a new t-shirt or a logo, or you need somebody to test because y'all are busy writing code, you're trying to do a new release, but you don't have time to test as much as you would like and as effectively as you would like. So have somewhere on there, like, these are some things that we're really looking for. We're always happy to have anybody come to our community, but if you have these skills, we really need these right now. That's just something that I think would be interesting, because if I went to a site and saw, oh, they need some event planning, well, that's something I can do. That's something I think I'm pretty good at. But if they were asking for design work, I am not your person. So you just need to make it easy for people to help you and to join your community, because they want to, but they want to know how to do it without really asking somebody, because it's intimidating to ask, hey, I'm new to your community, where do I get started? At any age. And a lot of people are shy. A lot of people, culturally, that's just not something they're going to do. So make it easy for them to find the information. As I mentioned, there's so many different aspects of a healthy open source community. Definitely you need folks who are developers. You also need technical writers to write that documentation, not only beginner documentation, but just also documentation on the different features of your project. You need marketing people so that they can help you bring new people into your community. You need testers, design folks, program or project managers, event planners, and then depending on the size of your organization, there may be some other skill sets that you need as well. So just think about what your project needs. If there's only 5 of you, okay, you may not need all of these things. But if you've got 20, 30 people, you're going to need a lot of these. So just keep that in mind. You also want to think like a new contributor. As I mentioned, having that beginner documentation is number 1 thing that your org should do. But if I'm somebody coming to the site, I'm reading through, okay, I'm like, I understand what you do. Okay, this is cool. This is a cool project. You've got great beginner documentation, so I'm good to go there. What do I do next? And so with Google Summer of Code, a lot of the organizations have very specific step-by-step instructions of what they want you to do. And so a lot of them have been able to then just use that same information and just put it on their general site for anybody coming in. So it doesn't have to be anybody coming in specifically for Summer of Code. It can be somebody who's just interested in the project. So it can carry over because it's all the same relevant information. Does the person want to come in? Should they start doing a pull request? Is there a style guide that they should be following? Should they file a bug first? Should they introduce themselves? Should they fix a bug? Maybe fix some documentation? What do you want them to do? So again, making this clear is super important and super helpful. I talked about it a little bit earlier. The imposter syndrome is huge with open source projects because you can come in and you're like, this is an amazing project. But wow, all these people have been doing this for 10 or 15 years, and some of them are the experts in the field. They've published papers. That's incredibly intimidating to anybody. So you want to make it clear that you're a welcoming community and that you want people that are new. That's fine. You want their ideas. They'll learn from you. You want to really make it clear that all of you are working on this together. You're all working towards a common goal. You're a community. There's not a hierarchy. Now, sometimes there is sort of a little hierarchy but we'll just say there's not a hierarchy in general. And then, again, new contributors means a healthy and sustainable open source community. So that's your ultimate goal. All right, so there's a lot of things on here, but I'm going to go over most of them. How can you be a great mentor? Now, I've read thousands, 10,000 plus at least, that's not an exaggeration, of feedback forms from our GSOC contributors and our GSOC mentors. And then I've also had conversations at events where people tell me about their experience. So all of this is coming straight from thousands of people and their feedback. One of the things that, as a great mentor, probably the most obvious thing is that you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be teaching the mentee. Now, there's different levels of being a teacher. Sometimes the mentee is pretty self-sufficient, so you don't have to do too much, but there's still something that you can teach them. So you should still not just say, oh, just let me know when you have a question. That's a terrible way to be a mentor. You need to be proactive and think, okay, they're not asking me questions, but let me kind of give them some information and start digging in, because maybe they don't realize that there's information they don't have. Because again, culturally, some people don't want to ask questions. They don't feel comfortable with it. Or maybe just kind of the vibe that you're giving is they're thinking, oh, well, I'm scared to ask a question. So you think about that. Take a step back and go, okay, is it me? Am I coming across a certain way? Am I coming across like, oh, I'm so busy and they don't want to ask me a question? So think about that if someone is not asking you questions, because there are always questions. So just try to figure out what the best way to communicate with your mentee is, to encourage them to ask you questions. And then again, being proactive and saying, hey, I know you've been working on this project for a couple weeks, you haven't asked any questions, but I know this part can be really tricky. Is there something I can help you with? Or here's a way that this might be of interest to you. So you can go about it that way. And being patient as a mentor is important. That's very important. But you also do need to be firm. So sometimes you'll get a student or a mentee who's going to ask 100 questions. At some point, you need to kind of stop them and say, okay, I want you to ask questions, but you also need to try to find the answers yourself. So the best thing you can do for yourself and everybody else and the mentee is direct them to resources to help themselves, because that's going to help them in the long run, because there's not going to always be somebody there to answer their questions. So if you use a particular, there's a newsletter that you always read, or there's certain sites that you use to get information or ask questions of others, then direct the mentee to those sites. Let them know, hey, here's some places that you can go. Like, I'm happy to answer some of your questions, but it's also really good for you to try to find the answer yourself first. And especially when the person is asking questions that are right there, whether it's on your homepage or FAQ or very easy to find in the code base, you need to answer it the first time, but then you need to help direct them to help themselves. Otherwise, you're going to become exhausted really quick, and that's not fair to you. Because again, most of the time, mentors are volunteering their time. It's not like they're getting paid for it. So your time is super valuable. So take care of yourself as well. That's a very important thing as a mentor. You also want to help them with their problem-solving skills. I had a lot of feedback, particularly in the last couple of years, I thought was interesting, where the GSOC contributors said that their mentors help them think through the processes better, because they would usually just jump right ahead. They go, okay, this is what I need to do. Let me go do it. Instead of saying, wait a second, let me take a step here. What would be the most efficient way to do this? Let me do this step by step and kind of pull apart the problem. And then they were able to kind of take a breather and go, oh, wait, I should actually do this, instead of immediately going full force ahead. So helping them with better problem-solving skills in general is going to just help them in life. So that's a great skill. You do need to adjust to your mentee. Your mentee, every mentee is different. Again, sometimes it's the shy factor. Sometimes it's the person thinks they know every single thing about everything, and they don't. So you have to be a little, more firm with them and say, okay, you know a lot about this. That's great. You're really good at this. But there's some other things over here that you're missing out on, or you're just kind of skipping over, that are important. So there's always something that can be taught. One of the things that has come up a lot, which also really makes me excited to be able to be part of this program, is that by the end of Google Summer of Code, so many of the students feel empowered. They have gained this massive amount of confidence in their abilities because of their mentor. This is all because of their mentor and the community. So again, you have a mentor in GSOC, but also the community is welcoming you, and they're answering questions in the forums and the chat channels. And so it's not just about your one mentor. Hopefully, if the organization's doing GSOC right, it's really about the community helping the mentees. And often, you have multiple mentees in your organization for GSOC. So they're often talking to each other. Now, they each have their own project, but it's really great to help them build that bond amongst the 3 or 4 or 5 GSOC contributors you have that year, because that's super important, because they'll have those relationships for life when they build that bond together, going through this same shared experience. You do need to be available as a mentor, but you don't need to be available 24/7. That's not fair to you. You need to set your own kind of expectations on with your mentee on when you're going to be available. Maybe every weekend you're not available, or every Wednesday and Friday you're not available. You have, other commitments. You don't have to go into details with the mentee. Just say, you know what, it'd be great if you can get your pull request in, say, Monday night, because every Tuesday morning I have time and I can definitely review your code at that point. But I'm not going to be available on Wednesdays and Fridays. And that's fine, because one of the things I think people realize very early on with GSOC is sometimes, because I receive the emails from the contributors saying, oh, my mentor hasn't gotten back to me. And I say, well, and how long? And they're like, 3 days. I'm like, okay, give them a break, especially the first few weeks people are getting settled in. If they haven't gotten back to you in 4 or 5 days, that's a different question, especially if they didn't say, oh, I'm going to be gone for a bit. And if you are going to be gone, if something happens, that's okay. Just see if you can have somebody else step in to be a mentor while you're gone and help this person so they can continue moving forward with their project. And again, all of these things are relevant across any mentorship type of program. So it's not just GSOC specific. You also want to create a rapport. That is probably one of the main things that's going to keep the person involved in your community. Building essentially a friendship. You don't need to know everything about their personal life. They don't need to know about yours. But if they mention, oh, I'm going to my grandmother's 100th birthday celebration this weekend, the next time you chat with them, just go, oh, how was your grandma's birthday party? It can be a 30-second interaction, but it shows that you are paying attention and that you listen, and it's about more than just the code. It's like, this is you're a friend, this is a community, this is we're people, we're human, we do care about each other's lives, and so just kind of try to build a rapport when you can. All right, I think I got through most of those. Oh, yeah, it's an important one. Best coding practices. Again, a very important one that I think the GSOC contributors are always very, very thankful for their mentors, because they may be taught, a lot of them, again, are about 90% this year are students in some sort of an academic program, and 10% are not. But those that are students, they're often taught a certain way in their academic programs, and not to say it's the wrong way, but it may not be the most efficient way. And so their mentors often have great advice on how to write more efficient code. That's something that pops up, it's already been popping up in the midterm evaluations I was reading last week. So that happens a lot. So not sure what professors are teaching in college, but it sounds like the mentors often have a more efficient way to write code. So if you can help them with that, that would be great, because if we don't need 10,000 lines of code, we can do it in 5,000, great for everybody involved. Now, this is a big one. We actually have a whole section in our GSOC mentor guide, and I'll have a slide here in a second where I had the URLs, and actually if you Google GSOC mentor guide, you'll be able to find it online. It's public. But we have a whole section in our mentor guide, and our mentor guide is super helpful. We also have a contributor guide. These were both written by, there's actually somebody in the audience today who helped write it, but by mentors, org admins, former students, and then Google program admins over the years. And the interesting thing is, I believe it was first written in 2008 or 2009, and we did kind of another little update around 2013 or 14. But after that, it's been very minor changes, because all of the information still stands. It really is about being a great mentor. There's sections in there about being a great mentor, keeping folks involved after GSOC. And so there are these little chapters that are about a page long or page and a half. It's not a massive book, so it's not going to take a week to read it. But there's so much helpful information that spans across any organization, even doesn't even have to be open source, but any kind of organization, it's going to help you. So I would highly suggest looking it over when you have a chance. You know, just read through the chapter titles and go, oh, well, let me check that one. That looks interesting. There's things about setting expectations for your mentee, and there's just so many things that are helpful. But a few of these I'm going to talk about a little more in depth, and then I have a couple of things on here I added as well. One of the things I did add that I don't think is actually in the mentor guide, so I need to add this in there, but it's super important, we've been talking about it a lot in the last few years, is encourage ownership of their project. So for GSOC specifically, the person spends 12 weeks coding on a project. They come back, at the end of the project, they get an evaluation from their mentor, and sometimes the people just go off, they receive their stipend, they go off on their merry way, and they don't stay in the community. Okay. That happens, that's fine. That's not what we want, but okay. But what you can do to make it more likely that they stay is, one, to remind them, this is your project. You built this. And if they kind of walk away, that project may die. Nobody else is going to maintain, most likely nobody else is going to maintain that, depending on how important it is, especially if it's something that they built that's like a new feature and not something that was built upon an existing feature or existing part of the code. So encourage ownership of their project, and also when you're working with your mentee, you realize their skill sets. And so maybe the project they worked on, they did a great job, but you could tell it's not what makes them, doesn't bring them joy. So but you can have those conversations throughout your time with them and realize, you know what, maybe this other project that we've been wanting somebody to work on, maybe they'd want to go work on this. So when they finish their GSOC project, you could say, hey, we have this other stuff over here this other project that would be a great fit for you if you'd like to work on it. And, and they can work on it on their own time. They don't have a set schedule. It's not like they have to do it in 12 weeks or the guidelines and timelines of GSOC. But they say, you've really been doing an amazing job, and I think you could really help with this project over here. Because again, that's empowering them, and then they feel like, oh wow, they really think my contributions have helped the community. They want me to stay. And so that's a great way to keep them involved in your community. Say thank you, and often. And hopefully they're also thanking you as a mentor, I really hope. But just say thank you for your work. Thank you for being a part of our community. This is really important to us, because the only way you keep growing a community is to have a kind community that hopefully everyone is thanking everybody often. And it's something I think we sometimes forget about. So saying thank you can go a long way. You can also do some sort of a social blast, celebrating the work of the person when they've finished the project, or maybe when they're even at the halfway point. Just do some sort of a social blast. You can also do a presentation where you have all of the mentees in your community in the next meeting that your team has, have them give a 3 to 5 minute presentation about their work in GSOC or your mentorship program. And I'd like to say 3 to 5. It could be longer if you want, but remember, a lot of people don't like to do presentations, and that's incredibly intimidating to them. But a 3 to 5 minute one, especially when it's online and they kind of can be looking at their notes, that's something I think most people can wrap their head around and not be too nervous about. If you say a 10-minute presentation, red flags start going up. So just keep that in mind. And some people are like, oh, I'll give a 3-hour presentation if you let me. And you may not want that either. But just try to think about your particular mentee and be like, okay, this person's pretty shy. Let's let them, and maybe you co-present it with them. That's something I know some of the mentors have done as well. Or you let a couple of the mentees kind of present together, and that makes them feel more comfortable. That's fine too. Sometimes the mentees for GSOC actually end up as co-authors on different papers because their project is has a very research-focused bent. And then sometimes the mentors will help their mentee with CFPs to get them into different conferences. So that's something else that you can help. And by doing that, these are all things that, again, is keeping the person involved in your community, keeping them, they feel like they're part of the community. And so they are much more likely to stay, and likely to stay multiple years with your community. Oh, and finally, stay in contact. Sometimes people do the program, so for example, do GSOC, then they go and finish their PhD, so they're really busy for a couple of years. They go get married, they go move to another country. But then they're available a few years later, and then they want to come back into your community. So if you've kept in contact with them, and that doesn't mean once a month, it could be 3 or 4 times a year, just checking in, seeing how they're doing, they feel like you still care, and again, you're a friend, and friendships go a long way, especially these days. So I think by having a just simple, every 3 or 4 months, sending an email or however you would communicate with each other, just checking in on them, that will keep you're kind of keeping the community top of mind to them. And so when they have a chance to come back, when life frees up and some time for them, they will come back to your community, or more likely to come back to your community. All right, these are the important links I mentioned. If you want to do a screenshot of that, the Mentor Guide and Contributor Guide, and of course the Google Summer of Code site, those are all things that you can do a Google search and they'll pop up. The middle one, Mentor Notes, this is an interesting one that we started doing this year. We did these mentor discussion panels where we had 3 to 4 mentors and org admins from GSOC on a call, on an hour-long call, and then I just started asking them questions and getting their viewpoints. And so there's so much helpful information in these. We basically did almost a, not word-for-word transcript, tried to clean it up some. So it is pretty long, but I went through and tried to highlight sections. So if you just skim through that doc and look for the highlighted parts where I put important point. At least read those sections. There's so much stuff in there. Again, things like being a great mentor and setting your student up for success and org admin tips. While org admin tips technically is specific for GSOC, it's still something anyone doing any kind of mentorship program would benefit from. So I would recommend checking this out. Right now, the only people that really, other than y'all, that know about this are the folks that are involved in our current program. But there's so much great information in here, I did want to make it available for anybody that might be interested. And then at the bottom, that is our GSOC support email. All right, I think we've got about 15 or so minutes for questions. You can ask me any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? All right, in the back. Will somebody check and see if we have any online questions as well?
And also, if you don't want to ask a question in front of everybody, I will be around after this for the coffee break, so you can come up and ask me one-on-one, because I know not everybody wants to ask a question in front of everybody, so totally fine. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually on the internship committee, so of course, a lot of what you're talking about is really relevant in terms of sustainability or for supporting our interns. And I'm wondering, I didn't catch all of your talk, so if I missed something, I apologize in advance. But one of the things that I've heard feedback is that internships don't see each other within a term. So it's hard for them to feel like they're part of the organization because they're not interacting with other parts. So a lot of the times you focused on the one-to-one relationship between a mentor and a mentoree, and I'm wondering have you seen a successful situation where the mentorees or the interns see each other and had a good result?
That is a great question. In case you didn't get, the question was essentially, it's often a mentor-mentee relationship, and the mentees involved in the program aren't talking to one another. So how do you get them, is that right? How do you get them connected? That is great, because that is actually something they ask me about, and I see that in our feedback form. It's already come in here at the midterm evaluations for GSOC this year. So one of the things I tried to do earlier at the beginning of this year, before the program started, or before people started coding, was to mention that to the organizations and say, it really would be great if you could do, even if it's just a monthly meeting with, especially at the beginning, do an intro, because that's key. Because the other people want to know everybody else that's a mentee in the program, in the same organization as them. So they then start their own connections, whether they do their own Slack channel or Discord or whatever, but they'll start their own, they'll start their own little circle outside of what all of y'all are communicating on. So having that initial that initial meeting very early on, almost immediately, is essential. Because if you do that, then they're all together, because they're literally in this together from the beginning to the end. If you do it at the end, that's still better than nothing, but it's much better to do that because they have a shared experience. And so then they become friends forever. For our Google Coding contest, for example, all these students were all around the world, but they created their own Discord channel. Discord? I don't know. Anyway, Slack, something. They created their own channel, and they all got to know each other even before they came out to the Bay Area for our grand prize trip, for example, in 2019. They all were friends. They all had their little, their groups, and so when they got out there, they just immediately, they're like, oh, I get to meet my friend in person, because one person's from London, one's from Paraguay. And so they wanted that. And they did that all of themselves. That was not something I did. And so it was really cool to watch that, how they organically did that. One person just said, hey, I'm going to create this channel, and they all jumped in. So clearly it was something that they wanted. So I think the thing is just set it up so that they can have some, make a suggestion, say, hey, if y'all all want to connect together, you don't have to connect with us, but all of you are in the same boat. So if you want to have your own chat channel or your own, whatever going on together, have your own discussions, have your weekly meetings, feel free, because while they have their own project, they are still going through all of it together. They're all trying to understand your code base. They're trying to understand and get integrated into the community. So yeah, that's a great point. I didn't really talk about that, but you're right. I should add that to this talk, so thank you.
I'd give up if anybody else has questions, but I have a few more. The second one is when people go through the GSOC program or they get, oh, I want to do this for a living. I want to do open source for a living. So from what you've seen through the program, how important is it to really understand how the work they do in these internships, like when you're advertising the internship, how does that translate to a career in open source, right? A lot of times, or free software for that matter, I think a lot of times when they're going there, because I think people are, and this is just a guess, when people get into this program, they're kind of like testing the waters of which pieces will get them into that career they want to as a goal. So, you know, like I think you were talking about how do you keep them in the community. This is where I'm talking is like, well, being in this community leads to some good thing in the future from a career perspective. This is especially true for if you're coming from like the global south, right? If you're coming from all those places that isn't Western Europe or the US, right? Like I've noticed that for those folks, the work they put in, invested in, has to lead to a positive financial outcome.
Right, so essentially the question was, how do you show that there is a future beyond, you know, they've done their program, now what's next? That they've completed their project, that this is still, you know, one, you want to keep them in the community, but also, hey, this is still your future, you can get a job in this industry, right, from your experience. But sometimes people will, I'm not sure you quite said this, but sometimes people will do the program and be like, okay, now I've checked a box, now I can move on. Thought that's where you're going with that, yeah. Now I've checked a box, now I'm going to move on. And some do, definitely, right? But I think one of the things, I know some of the organizations for GSOC, they've actually been able to create, whether it's a job or some sort of part-time job or some small project for the people to continue where they can give them a small amount of money, or it doesn't always have to be money, but yes, money is definitely important. For all these different mentorship programs, it's, sorry, make sure I'm not going over time. It's essential that they understand that doing the program, they're building these skills. So it's going to look great on their resume that they've completed Outreach here, GSOC, or Linux Foundation mentorship programs. That's going to look great because they have something they can point to. They have the code that they can point to when they go to an interview and go, hey, I completed this project. So they can see that, oh, okay, you do know how to code. It's not just, okay, yeah, you got a great GPA, wonderful, okay, but hey, you've actually done something. That's super helpful. Also, the connections that people make in their communities are key. And I think that is a question that actually we get from people is like, okay, you know, people ask, can I get an interview at Google? No, is the answer to that. And so it's like, this is not an interview process for Google, despite what some people have said, it's not. So we tell them, you know, you can apply just like everybody else and be sure you put Google Summer of Code on your LinkedIn, on your various, you know, definitely have it on your resume, and even put a little more specifics about what you did and the technologies you use, particularly on your resume, so people understand it. But that is a tricky thing, right? Because people, you know, especially when you're younger, your thought is, okay, I just need to go and get a good paying job because now I need to pay off my school debt, which is a valid concern, especially these days. So that's when you kind of realize that they're not going to probably be as involved in your community right away, but if you can still give them that lifeline, and this is kind of the keep in contact part that I was trying to get to earlier, they may go off and do something else for a bit, but if you still are in contact with them, they're more likely to come back to your community when they have time because it was such a great experience to them. And another thing you can do that I didn't put on here is encourage your people to become mentors themselves. That is something that has happened a lot in our communities because that keeps them involved, and they realize it was so meaningful for them. They want to help others, and that happens a lot with GSOC. So these people go on to become mentors themselves, sometimes for decades, sometimes for 2 or 3 years, and that's fine. But that also keeps them actively involved in your community and helping you with your next generation of developers.
Thank you. Other questions? We good? Oh, where are we pointing? Okay, great.
And just so you know, I do have a few bits of swag up here at the front. There's lots of stickers and screen cleaners in the back room, but there is a little bit of swag for those of you that are here in the room today. So when we wrap up, there's stuff on the first set of chairs here.
Yeah, hi. Former GSOC student, contributor, something. I'm curious, kind of a follow-up question. Has GSOC thought at all about kind of building up more of like professional networking opportunities as kind of like the next step after the program? Because I think like, we can network within the GNOME community, but like a lot of our technology also applies to the broader Linux community, and the Linux community applies to the broader coding, yada. Yeah, thanks.
Very good question. So it's interesting timing on that. I can't commit to saying anything, but we are working on that actively. I have recently we were able to get somebody else, because for a long time it's just been me on the project on Google Summer of Code, so running it myself with the help of partial help of somebody else. Now we have another full-time Googler who is coming in and devoting some more of her time. So that is literally what we're looking into. We're trying to figure out what does some sort of an alumni network look like for GSOC. So, on that note, if you have ideas, please email me. You can email me directly there, if that's big enough. I'm not sure if that's big enough. But this is definitely something that we have been thinking about. It's something that people have been asking about in some way, probably the entire 13 years I've been here, but we never had the time to be able to dig into it. And so now we have a little more time to do this. This is definitely something that we want to do. So if anybody has ideas, if you think of an idea, 10 months from now, whatever, hopefully we'll already have something going, but we're always going to add to it. So feel free to email me directly, because I would love your thoughts, because this is something that we're just literally in the last week and a half we've started thinking about. So yes, thanks.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. If I could put one plug in for you, is something that I've always admired that you guys do is the alumni as well as other events you do around the conferences and things that you go to. And I think that that's really admirable, and an area that we could probably help support you as well when we do this, or at FOSDEM or other events. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks, folks.